hosting this online public lecture that will be delivered by Dr. Philippe Aguillot and will be chaired by Mr. Sunil Berry. We all have them online today. I will start with handing the stage over to Mr. Berry to give the opening remarks, and post that we'll get into the discussion. Thank you so much. Mr. Berry, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you. I regret that I'm not there in person for many sentimental reasons. I actually opened the office of the IGC on the ISI campus in 2011, and it would have been nice to come back, but other commitments, and I appreciate that the hosts have allowed me to join virtually. Obviously, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be moderating this lecture by Philippe Aguillot, who has an association with the LSE. Philippe would not remember, but I heard some of earlier forms of the work I think he's going to present at an event at the Peterson Institute in 2023 when Jean Pisani and Adam Posen invited me to participate. And I think the question of path-dependent innovation was a paper that Philippe delivered then. So Philippe, as an admirer of yours, let me, on behalf of myself and others, congratulate you on sharing the Nobel Prize and for the clarity of your Nobel Prize lecture. And also the presentation that you made at the Marcus Academy on should we fear AI. Now, they've given me as much as 10 minutes for opening this. I'm not sure I'm going to take all that time, but the format that has been prescribed is after my opening remarks, Philippe, you go, I think, without interruptions, or you can
Okay.
through your
Yes.
presentation for about
Yes.
40 minutes.
Yeah.
And then you and I have a discussion, and then we open it to Q&A at the end.
Yes.
So I, am now heading the government's think tank, Niti Aayog, but my background is not as a researcher, but I would say as somebody interested in the impact of research on policy. And I think that the framing that I'd like to offer to this event and the work of Philippe is in several parts. So Philippe is going to be talking on the basis of the PowerPoints he shared with me and the slide presentation on one dimension of what is worked on, which is, as it were, public policy and innovation, and particularly how empirical evidence indicates that various kinds of public policies do have an impact on, if you like, startup innovation or innovation in nascent areas, which otherwise threatens to be preempted by innovation in existing areas. And you may ask, is this relevant, or what part of this is relevant for India? And in this regard, the point I would make is that innovation is non-rivalrous, and that indeed under the UNFCCC convention, because climate change was considered a problem of the global commons, the idea that innovation and the fruits of innovation should be shared across the world was a part of the framing of the UNFCCC. Now, where we are at the moment, I don't think is terribly responsive to that. But the important point I wanted to make was that India, as a country which is wishing to develop, subject to a carbon constraint, is a beneficiary of innovation at the frontier. And therefore, what Philippe has to say about innovation at the frontier, I think is of interest to us. There's a second issue which arises from his work, which is India relevant, which is that what is the kind of innovation that India ought to be doing for itself, and uh, and why, as it were. Is it process innovation? Is it frontier innovation? So I think that's a class of issues that the IGC and the ISI might wish to extract from this discussion. But the second point I wanted to make, and then I'll hand over to Philippe, is really drawing on his Nobel lecture and his how should we fear AI, which is that for us, we are wishing to grow subject to being a responsible global citizens. And growth is about, as it were, raising labor productivity and perhaps total factor productivity at a time when we have a large set of a large set of new entrants and existing entrants to the workforce. And so the work that Philippe has done about new technologies and their impact on productivity versus employment, particularly AI, where India seems to be developing some momentum without being at the frontier. I think those are relevant for the work of the IGC and for the work of Niti Aayog. So we will listen to what Philippe has to say on green growth and the energy transition, but I hope he will allow me to, in our bilateral Q&A, to also address the issues of broader technological change and what it means for an emerging market, a large emerging market like India. So with those introductory words, and let me then hand over to Philippe. And Philippe, partly because we're both virtual and partly so that, we can get the full story, I will let you run till the end. And welcome. Please proceed.
So much for introduction. And I need to be able to share screen. Can you allow me to share screen? Shruti, can you allow me to share screen? Oh, thank you so much. Very good. Excellent. Excellent. Great. Let me just. Great. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I will present on climate change and green innovation. So here is a picture of young Schumpeter. And Schumpeter is known for having put forward the notion of creative destruction, the process whereby new innovation displaces old technologies. With Peter Howitt, we wrote a growth model in 1987 that would encompass creative destruction. The first idea is that long-run growth is driven by a cumulative process of innovation where each innovator builds upon previous innovations. The second idea is that innovations result from entrepreneurial activities motivated by the prospect of innovation rents. If you innovate, you get a better product, a cheaper way to produce. That gives you some rents for a while until you are yourself superseded by subsequent innovation. And the creative destruction, new innovations displace old technologies. They make new technologies obsolete. At the heart of the paradigm, there is a contradiction that on the one hand, you need innovation rents to motivate innovation activities, but on the other hand, those rents can be used ex post to prevent subsequent innovation because yesterday's innovators, they don't want to themselves be subject to creative destruction. Okay, so that's the main paradigm. One last word on competition. Typically, when you are a frontier firm, which is the blue line, you are close to the technological frontier in your sector, you react to more competition by innovating. You innovate to escape competition because you typically get competition at the fringe. When you are an orange firm, you are far below the technological frontier in your sector. You tend to be more discouraged lagging firms tend to be more discouraged by competition because you feel that it will be even harder for you to catch up with the leading edge. Okay, and so now I move into climate, and there. What's very interesting is first this figure. If you look at the left-hand side figure, you see that if you look at the evolution of worldwide temperature, you see that the temperature started to take off exactly in the early 20th century, around 1940, 1840, 1850. That's exactly when growth started to take off. You know very well the work of Madison, and Madison used urbanization and other type of statistics of data to try to trace back the evolution of world GDP or world per capita GDP. And he obtains a very similar curve that essentially you have no growth of GDP. Can you hear me well? Yes? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So the Madison curve is exactly similar. I mean, you see no growth of world GDP up to the 1800s, and growth takes off only 200 years ago with the advent of the first technological revolution, the steam engine revolution in Europe first, and then it diffuses to the rest of the world. And so, although this is no proof that climate change has to do with growth, coincidence is stunning between the evolution of world GDP and the evolution of world temperature. It really, temperature took off exactly when growth took off. Okay, so that of course, uh, uh, goes, helps the advocates of growth, but of course I am not at all following them. Okay, another thing is that if you look at the evolution of CO2 emissions worldwide since 1970, you see that CO2 emissions, particularly by China and India, started to take off, where really growth started to take off in China and India. So you see, again, this is smoking gun suggesting that there is a relationship between growth and CO2 emissions. Okay, so now what should we infer from this? Should we go back to pre-1800, and have degrowth, negative growth, or is there an alternative to degrowth to solve the climate challenge? And the degrowth, we went through it during the lockdown. You remember during COVID, almost 6 years ago, we were all locked down between March and June 2020, and GDP went down in all our countries, and so did CO2 emissions. But do we want to go back to the lockdown? It had dramatic effects. It increased poverty and famines in less developed countries, and it had a damaging effect on our youth, even in developed countries. So we don't want we don't want to reinitiate the lockdown episode just for the purpose of climate fighting. And so that's the and so but there is an alternative to degrowth. There is green innovation. And what do I mean by green innovation? Well, green innovation means a lot of things. First, it means something I've not written on this slide, which is innovation, which is part of the mitigation, but it's innovation in our behavior. We know we should be more mindful when we decide to fly out, rather than do a Zoom, or to let all the lights on in our homes, or to let the heating on at maximum temperature when we leave when we leave our house. I mean, there are various ways to behave, to sort out our garbage. So in our behavior, there is a way to innovate in our behavior. But I think that there is what that contributes to slow down the rise in temperature. But also what contributes further to slow down is what I call the mitigation innovation, which, for example, discovering clean sources of energy, discovering new ways to produce using less energy. All that contributes to what I call mitigation, which means slowing down the rise in temperature. Then you have the innovations that aim at a better adaptation to climate change. For example, building new dikes, to fight against the fact that there is rising water, the sea level is rising and you want to fight against that and you build new dikes, or you conceive new air conditioning systems that are less expensive and less energy consuming themselves. All this is what I call adaptation innovation. And you have the amelioration innovations, which are innovations aimed at making air colder. You see, at cooling down the air. So, for example, there is this idea of putting giant shades in space, for example, to protect against the sun. There is also the idea of geoengineering. For example, the physics department at Harvard works very much on the technology which reproduces what happens when you have a volcanic eruption. You have particles, of sulfur in the air, and they screen between us and the sun, and that cools down the air. And they try to master this technology of injecting sulfur in the air to cooling for the purpose of cooling down the air. And of course, those have secondary effects on crops, for example. And they try to master that technology. Anyway, so there is a lot under the expression green innovation. Now, the problem is that firms do not spontaneously innovate green. And in fact, in joint work with John Van Reenen, David Amos, Antoine de Chez-le-Prêtre, and Ralph Martin, in the JP in 2016, we looked at automotive industries worldwide, and we look at the extent to which firms that used to innovate in dirty technologies in the automotive industry continue to innovate in dirty technologies. So we extract all triadic patents in automotive industries filed in 80 patent offices worldwide. So triadic patents as those patents that are filed, in European Patent Office, Japanese Patent Office, and US Patent Office in particular. Those are good patents. And those patents, we can classify them into clean and dirty patents, following the OECD IPC definition. I'll get to it in a moment. And we know also for each patentor, we know her history of past patenting. So we know what she innovated, whether she innovated clean or dirty in the past. So here, for example, you see the description of all patent classes in the automotive industry. So moving from up to down, you go from more related to electric vehicles to more related to combustion to thermic vehicles. Okay, so you could say that the clean patents are those at the top of this slide, and the more dirty patents are those at the bottom of the slide. Okay, and so that's the classification. So then what we do in that paper is we regress the propensity, the current flow by each firm in each country to patent clean or patent dirty as a function of various things. But the most important is the stock of clean and dirty patents. So we see that a firm that has a high stock of clean patents has a high propensity to innovate clean. That's the 0303 significance. Symmetrically, when you have a higher stock of dirty patents, that has a positive spillover on your propensity to innovate clean, but having a higher stock of dirty patents has a much higher spillover on your propensity to currently innovate dirty. You have the 0.542 versus the 139. So if you wanted to define the propensity to innovate clean rather than dirty by subtracting the second column to the first, you would get at the end that having a higher stock of clean increases your propensity to innovate clean rather than dirty, and having a higher stock of dirty overall increases your propensity to innovate dirty rather than clean. So that means that under laissez-faire, firms spontaneously will tend to continue innovating in what they are already good at. You tend to, build on your expertise. You see what I mean? And that's what I call path dependence. But that's the bad news. The good news is that, for example, the carbon price, carbon tax helps redirect, is one thing that can help redirect firms' innovation towards clean. If you increase the fuel price, you see that it increases firms' propensity to innovate clean and reduces firms' propensity to innovate dirty. Okay, so that's the thing. So overall, from this study, the bad news is that this path dependence implies that under laissez-faire, if you started from an economy where firms were mostly innovating in dirty technologies and you do nothing, the firm may get stuck with dirty technologies, and that may get you into environmental disaster. The good news is that policy can do something about it. In particular, the government can avoid disaster by redirecting innovation towards clean technologies. One way to do it is through carbon tax, but we will see in a moment that's not the only way. Okay. So the further implication from this path dependence is that creative destruction helps you. Why? Because new firms, they don't have bad habits by definition because they are new. So if you favor creative destruction, by which I mean the entry of new firms on its own, this helps this helps you become cleaner because those new firms, they are not, they don't carry the burden of having innovated in dirty technologies in the past. Okay, that's the first implication. The second implication is that you should act right away. Why? Because if you start from an economy where firms mainly, innovated mainly in dirty technologies in the past, without intervention, they will continue innovating towards dirty inputs, and therefore the gap between the clean and dirty technology will widen up, and therefore it will be more costly tomorrow to intervene, because the cost of intervention, there is a cost of intervention, is that you force firms that were very good at clean innovation, at dirty innovation, to innovate in something they're not so good at. So it means reduce growth for a while until they will become as good with dirty technologies as they are, with clean technology as they were with dirty technology innovation. You see what I mean? So I know when you intervene, be in mind that there is a cost to it. Those who believe that there is zero cost of action is not right. Michael Porter and others, that I respect highly, but there is a cost, and the cost is reduced growth as long as clean technologies catch up with dirty technologies. But what you do, but by acting right away, you reduce this cost of intervention. So for example, we in this joint work I did with Acemoglu, Bernstein, and Emus, we estimated that, so we looked at the discount rate. The discount rate of 1% is the Nick Stern discount rate. That gives more weight to future generations. Okay, but even, sorry, that's right, that's a Nick Stern discount rate. And you see that there is we looked at the welfare loss of delaying action. And we express the welfare loss in terms of per year loss consumption on average. And you see that there is a big loss of delaying action because you make it much more costly. You will have to intervene. It's like the dentist. If you have a cavity and you wait before you go to the dentist, more drilling will be required for the dentist to cure the cavity. It's exactly the same here, okay? And you have this cost. But what's interesting is that even with the Nordhaus discount rate of 1.5%, Nordhaus would typically put more weight on current generations. Even then, there is a welfare loss of delaying action. And you can see this figure The green curve shows you the evolution of GDP if you act right away. And the red curve is the evolution of GDP if you delay. Of course, if you delay, you grow faster for a while, but then you see that you will eventually, the red curve gets below the green curve because the cost of intervention will be bigger if you wait. You will need to intervene more strongly and for a longer period to solve the climate problem if you wait, okay? So that's, I think, a very important idea. And there was this debate between Nick Stern and Nordhaus whether you should act right away or not. And Nick Stern said, we should act right now. And Nordhaus said we should be more, gradual. But what's interesting is when you introduce endogenous directed technical change like we do here, even under the Nordhaus discount rate, you want to act right away. Voilà, that's the thing. A third conclusion from this, the fact this path dependence, is that you need two instruments, not only carbon tax. Why? Because you have two sources of market failure. The first source of market failure is environmental externality. That means if I pollute, I damage production by my neighbors also, you see, and utility by everybody around. That's the environmental externality. But there is also the knowledge externality, which is a path dependence. If I innovate dirty now, it will induce myself to innovate dirty in the future. By the way, on top of that, there is a contemporaneous knowledge externality. If I go back to the table here, you can see that you have a clean spillover. When you are surrounded by cleaner innovations, you tend to innovate clean. When you are surrounded by dirtier innovators, you tend to innovate dirty. So there is also, on top of the path dependence, there is a contemporaneous knowledge spillover. So when you have two types of externalities, you need at least two instruments, not just carbon tax. You need carbon tax and subsidy to clean innovation. I call that green industrial policy, but I will get back to that in a moment. So that's another very important conclusion, is that carbon tax alone will not do the job. In the US, they have, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a way to do green industrial policy. And in China, they do very active green industrial policy. Europe concentrated on carbon tax, and I think we were wrong. We need both carbon tax and green industrial policy. Okay, so that's the first thing. I come back in a second. Okay, so in fact, we calculated the loss if we use only carbon tax instead of the combination of carbon tax and green subsidies and innovation to green innovation, subsidies to subsidizing green innovation. If we use only carbon tax and not carbon tax plus subsidies to green innovation, then you need a carbon tax 15 times higher during the first 5 years and 12 times higher during the following 5 years. And this entails a loss in welfare, both under the Nick Stern and the Nordhaus discount rates, okay, which I show in this table, okay. So now I would like to look at the fact, should we use intermediate source of energy? In the US, they discovered shale gas in around 2005. They really made progress in extracting shale gas in the mid-2000s. Okay, and what you can see is that the share of fuel in electricity generation, it was very much the share of coal went down and the share of natural gas went up because of the discovery of shale gas. Okay, now that's interesting because I looked at that with, again, another paper with Daron Acemoglu, Lynn Barrage and David Emus, where we analyzed the effects of an exogenous improvement in the extraction technology for gas on aggregate pollution in the short run and the long run. And what happens in the short run is that, of course, when you discover shale gas, there is, you substitute shale gas for coal, and shale gas generates less CO2 emissions. So that's good it reduces CO2 emission. That's a substitution effect. You substitute shale gas for coal. And shale gas is a cleaner source of energy than coal. But on the other hand, of course, when you discover shale gas, when you improve the shale gas extraction, you make energy as a whole cheaper. And therefore, there is a bigger demand for energy. And therefore, that tends to pollute more. That's the scale effect. But the substitution effect dominates if the gas is sufficiently cleaner than coal. And indeed, that's what we observed. I mean, we calibrated our model, and I will show you the calibration of our model, and I'll show you the real thing. You see that our calibrated model, we look what I call capital B is the productivity in the extraction of shale gas. And you see that when you increase productivity in the extraction of shale gas, you reduce emissions per unit of electricity produced at the intensity column, but that's the substitution effect. But on the other hand, you increase consumption of energy because you make energy overall cheaper. That's the second column. That's the scale effect. But you see that overall, the substitution effect dominates the consumption effect. And you see that the overall effect on CO2 emissions of improved shale gas extraction is to reduce CO2 emissions. Okay, that's the short run. And you can see that's indeed what happened in the US. What you can see in the US is that when you look at CO2 emissions, they were rising up to the shale gas revolution, and CO2 emissions started to decrease in the US following the shale gas revolution. You see, and that's the dotted curve. But you have a long run effect of the shale gas is that it might, have perverse effect on the direction of innovation. Typically, what it may do, it will tend to direct innovation away from both innovations on plants that use coal, which is a good thing, but it will also divert research resources away from clean production innovation. And that's bad. And so the problem with the shale gas boom is that you divert research resources, R&D resources, from both coal innovation, that's good, but that's a good thing, but you also, divert research R&D resources away from research on renewables, for example, you see. And that, in the long run, may move the economy from a path with declining CO2 emissions to a path with increasing CO2 emissions. So here I see that a not managed shale gas boom. So suppose you have exogenously our capital B going up, the productivity of shale gas extraction going up. You will see that, the share of scientists in green with the boom will tend to go down because a number of scientists will move away from green innovation into shale gas innovation, into innovating in plants that use shale gas. Well, and that's the undesirable effect, long-run effect of the shale gas boom. Okay, so the optimal policy, therefore, with the boom, you see, it will be, in fact, the optimum will be to increase even more than ever the subsidy to green innovation. More than ever, you will want to be voluntarist and accompany and push for all scientists to go into green. You see, that's the thing, is that the optimum more than ever will be to go green, okay? And that's the black curve. In fact, you see what's very interesting, you can look and you can see that with the boom, more than ever, you want all scientists to go into green. The optimal research subsidy, which is the middle figure, you can see that even more you want a high subsidy to green innovation, whereas the carbon tax remains the same as before. So you still want a carbon tax, but when you have the shale gas boom, to avoid the undesirable perverse effect that the shale gas boom might divert research resources away from renewables, you will even more increase the subsidy to green innovation. So you see, when you have you want to manage this intermediate source of energy, which is better than coal, but not as good as the renewable, but still you need it in the short run. more than ever, you need to add green research subsidies to the carbon tax. Okay, so it reinforces the case for having two instruments, not only the carbon tax. Okay. Now, I would like to say, well, I talked about the role of government to try to redirect firms' innovation away from dirty technologies into clean technologies. Okay, and I said, well, two instruments, carbon tax and subsidy to green innovation. But I want to talk also about the role of civil society, and that's based on joint work with Roland Benabou, Ralph Martin, and Alexandra Roulet in the American Economic Review Insight. And then what we did is to say, well, we looked at the extent to which we went back to the automotive industry with more recent data, because there's a more recent paper than the one with Van Reenen et al. In the JPE. And we said, well, you know, firms, also the civil society, in particular consumers, also influence firms' choice whether to innovate clean or dirty. And what I call values, which is the first row here, is the extent firms are exposed on average to countries where, according to the World Value Survey, consumers care more about the environment. So we know from, the World Value Survey, the extent to which citizens in various countries care more or less for the environment, are ready to pay more or less for cleaner air, for better environment. And what you can see is the propensity to innovate clean, which is the log of 1 plus flow of clean minus log of 1 plus flow of dirty. But you see that it is positively correlated with values. That means that firms, when they are exposed, when they sell to countries where consumers are more mindful of the environment, they themselves cater to consumers' tastes, and they tend to innovate cleaner. Okay, that's the first row, the values. But what's interesting is the third row, the interaction between values and competition. This propensity, firm propensity to innovate cleaner in environment where consumers are more mindful of the environment, is amplified when you have more competition. And the reasoning is as follows. Suppose I'm not myself very virtuous, okay, but I'm first a monopoly. I, to some extent, cater to consumer states and I innovate reasonably clean. But suppose now Suman is coming, and Suman is virtuous. Then, in order not to lose my consumers to Suman, even more to escape competition with Suman, and that's the escape competition effect. But I will escape competition with Suman by innovating cleaner even. And so you get back the escape competition effect I mentioned at the beginning. But here it's an escape competition by innovating cleaner. When I face an environment where consumers, are demanding clean, and I face more competition, then I escape competition not only by innovating more, but innovating more cleaner. And that's, I think, very interesting. And you see, that proves that on top of government action, civil society, in particular consumers, can enormously influence the direction of technical. So if you educate your population and also to be more mindful about the environment, and you combine that with competition policy, this has the effect of, as big an effect, even bigger than a big increase in carbon price, you see. And it's a further way to redirect the exchange. So overall, both the government and civil society can contribute to redirect firms' innovation away from dirty technologies into clean technologies. Okay, so that's
I want to give you a time check, Philippe. We're at about half an hour now. Another 10 minutes.
Perfect. Yeah. That's perfect. I need 10 more minutes and I'm done.
Okay.
In conclusion, so far, innovation-based climate models suggest that laissez-faire leads to disaster due to path dependence in the direction of innovation. Conclusion B, one must act now, and multiple instruments might be used, not just carbon tax. And you have this triangle between firms, the state, and civil society. Firms innovate, the state can redirect firms' innovation through carbon tax and subsidy to clean, but civil society also have a role to play, in particular consumers have a role to play. Okay, so I would like to make a few, since I have 10 more minutes, to say a few more things. One thing I would like to say is the role of finance. it's important. You see, I want to tell you that I know that firms that are the more prone to innovate clean are the new firms that do not, that do not suffer from this path dependence problem that I mentioned before. And but those are the firms that are most likely to be hit by a financial crisis because they don't have accumulated wealth. So we looked here at the effect of exposure to German banking crisis on green innovation. So, for example, there was a bank in Germany that suffered a lot from, it didn't go bust, but almost, it was Commerzbank. And we compared the innovation by firms highly exposed to Commerzbank to innovation by similar firms not exposed as much to Commerzbank lending. And you see that it affected particularly green patenting. That's the right-hand side. And that happened mainly in young firms. So young firms, the new ones that are more prone to be innovating clean, were the most affected by the financial crisis. So it means that a credit crunch or lack of finance can be a problem, can slow down the transition to green economy because it will mostly hit those firms that are that are meant to lead the process of transition without the new firm. But those are the ones that are more cash constrained. Those are the firms that are more prone to be affected by the financial crisis. Okay. Another thing is that do we need industrial policy more than just green subsidy to green innovation? You see, and there is a recent paper with Lynn Barrage, Eric Donald, David Huss, and Ernest Liu. And we say, well, you see what you have is that typically sector 3, you have electric car. So electric car is the clean sector 3 versus non-electric car. But the electric car use batteries. But batteries themselves, they have clean components and dirty components. They have components that are produced clean or components that are produced dirty. Those clean components themselves have components that are partly produced clean and partly produced dirty. What you would like is to greenify the whole value chain. So there you face a coordination problem, you see. And when you face a coordination problem, you have multiple steady states. So typically you have this steady state A, where you have a low greenification. For example, here I look at the case where I only have 2 layers, not 3 layers. And you can see that you have the steady state A with low greenification in the downstream and upstream sector, but you have the steady state C, which is also stable, where you have high greenification in both. And what you would like is to move to C. But if you start from here, from the zero, from no greenification at all, the economy will move to A and will stop there. It will not be, and the carbon tax will not allow you to move beyond A. It's not enough. You need to coordinate on the steady state C. And for that, you need sector-specific subsidies and to solve the coordination problem. And that means that really it's not just subsidies. You need a true industrial policy to get the whole greenification of the value chain, you see, on top of the carbon tax. So that's important. They push further the idea that it's you need a true green industrial policy on top of the carbon tax to get to greenify your economy, because many sectors are like the electric cars. They have several layers and you have to greenify the whole chain. Okay. There is, finally, I want to end up with the growth versus degrowth debate. You remember I told you, should we have degrowth or should you have endogenous green growth? And that's just recent work I've done with Timo Vopart, Michael Peters, Matthew Schwarzman, and Fabrizio Zilibotti, a theory of endogenous degrowth and environmental sustainability. And the main idea there is that you have goods. Some of the things, the degrowth people, they don't say only, is part of what they say, you can't disagree with. When they say that climate change has to do with growth, yes, I think so. When they tell you that you should move away from quantity to quality, they are right. When they tell you that measured GDP growth does not capture all the growth that you are interested in, they are also, they have a point. So I agree with them on all those points, yet I believe in innovation and I believe in growth of utils. So we develop a model where goods differ with respect to both service intensity in their production, and the premium to quality they carry. Typically, goods with higher premium to quality tend to be the most service intensive. Think of an expensive meal. An expensive meal is a lot of time spent to make it into a three-star restaurant meal, or a luxury car that involves a lot of services to make it a luxury car. Okay, so that's the first thing. Goods differ with respect to service intensity and premium to quality, and the two tend to be correlated. The second idea is that more service industry service intensive goods have lower carbon footprint. Tertiarization reduces carbon footprint. So, for example, here you can look across goods. The higher the cost share of service inputs into the production of a good, the lower pollution intensity the production of that good involves. That's across goods, but I do that across country. When you have a higher service employment share, in those countries with higher employment share, they display lower emission, or US counties that display higher service employment share display lower emission. That's the first idea. Another idea is that you have non-homothetic preference. When they become richer, consumers tilt their consumption more towards goods with higher premium to quality and higher service intensity. So proportionally, they contribute less to aggregate pollution per dollar spent. Per dollar spent, that's what I want to say, of course. And of course, innovators, they will direct innovation towards what the consumers want. So as an economy becomes richer and there is a bigger demand for quality over quantity, the innovation itself will direct towards quality versus quantity. So as an economy develops, innovation will shift towards quality innovation, and growth therefore will tilt towards becoming increasingly quality driven and therefore less well captured by measured GDP growth. And you can see here, as an economy develops, employment share of services increases, employment share of manufacturing goes down. That's the the northwest graph. Then what you can see is that if I move to the northeast, the share of research for quality quantity innovation will increase. You see, you will have a tapering of quantity innovation. You see, the Q innovation, and then what you see, that total emissions will tend to go down eventually, because you will move into innovating into service economy, which is less polluting. And also what's very interesting is that even though we measure lower growth in our economies, if we take into account the quality growth, which is less well captured by GDP, measured GDP, the real growth will keep going up. So we may have economies where we have measured degrowth, but true quality growth, you see. And but where we depart from the degrowth advocates is that we believe in innovation and we believe in the growth of utils. So we will. That's still what we want to have, better standards of living. So conclusion: green innovation is key to fighting climate change. We need both carbon tax and green industrial policy. Degrowth advocate makes some good points. Yet we need green innovation, and we do not need degrowth. Okay, and that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippe. So now the program, we are, given the fact that we started 5 minutes late, we are exactly on time. But I was told that you, in addition to myself, have a hard stop. So do you have the extra 5 minutes at the end, Philippe? What time is your next engagement before I conduct our bilateral and then open to Q&A? Do you
Yes, so I'm at your disposal.
Okay, good, thanks. Excellent. So what I would like to do, I framed some of the issues as they apply to India early on, and maybe we can come to that. But now that I've heard from you, the scope and the main points of your argument, I'd like to understand whether this is for the globe as a whole, i.e., what happens if you introduce a variety of nation states with different factor endowments into this framework? And I have in mind two or three ideas, and I'd like you to respond to them. So first, way back when, I think when Larry Summers was still chief economist of the World Bank, he
Yeah,
put forward the proposition that basically
yeah,
poor
yeah,
countries should be allowed to pollute
yeah,
because
yeah,
which is essentially a carbon space kind of argument. And uh, it's linked up now with the whole transition that has taken place in thinking about gains from trade as linked to comparative advantage to, as it were, gains from trade coming from inter industry trade. So I just wanted you to, as it were, given what we are seeing with the massive application of subsidies in China to green technologies, the disruption this
yeah.
is creating. So could you bring, as it were, your theoretical findings to the real world of
Yes.
today and a world of
Yeah,
considerable differences?
yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, in fact, you see, in the degrowth, the degrowth world, and so first, for international trade, and the global economy, first thing is that if you have developed countries that innovate greener, it has spillovers. I mean, typically, less emerging markets countries have an incentive to go there. We see that, China is developing a lot is green electric car sector because they know there is a demand for electric car even in the, in the West. So uh, we think that already, if a set of countries go green innovation, it will have spillovers on the rest of the world. I mean, that on its own. Of course, the danger is that some countries may turn into pollution heavens. They may say, well, you go green, we decide to welcome all dirty producers. You can't, you face a carbon tax in Europe, for example, come and pollute in our country, and then you can re-export. You can take advantage of global free trade to re-export your goods elsewhere. So that's a problem, and that's where carbon tariffs or the threat of carbon tariffs can play a role. I believe very much in the combination between transfer of green technologies to less developed countries, and if they have access to those technologies, to prevent pollution heavens, the threat of carbon tariffs. I think that's an important thing. Another consideration is in my on the genus degrowth, you may have specialization, of course. You see, if I decide, for example, to say, well, let's put, alors, that goes against the carbon tariff. If I'm being too tough with countries that pollute more because they need to develop, the problem is that I will slow down their development and therefore I will slow down their transition from quantity-based innovation into quality-based innovation. So that's a downside of punishing countries that are currently polluting more. So I believe, that emerging countries, they should be given greater tolerance to polluting more, but at the same time, you should, of course, make it cheaply, available the green technologies to those countries. You see, so my view is that you have to be more lenient vis-à-vis emerging countries that are trying to grow because we polluted a lot when we grew, and how can we deny, the possibility? I don't say we should encourage that emerging countries should pollute. I think what we should do is to maximize the scope for transfer of green technologies to those countries, but we should have, of course, a higher tolerance for their, understanding that they can't totally avoid pollution in their process of development. So we should have higher tolerance for that, but while at the same time, making it easier, making it easier for them to access the green technologies. You see, that's the way I
Okay, no,
think
I
about
understand
it.
that, but let me then ask so that others have the opportunity. So that very important chart about why you need to act early, is
Yes.
that is that a chart for a country? Is it a chart for the world? Is it a chart that applies to an India, say, which is a follower? Because if I understand what Nick has to say, his attitude is because you have a shelf of technology out there, and because you are
Yeah,
investing so much more
yeah,
than the investment rate in the G7, uh, he would argue that the space between the curves is in some ways higher for a fast-growing emerging market than it is.
yeah,
Uh, uh,
yeah,
uh, uh, and I'd like to, in a
yeah,
sense,
yeah.
yeah, go
So
ahead.
I
I think you
said,
get my point.
no, no, I get your point. So particularly developed countries should act right away. Quoi. Voilà. That's what I say in frontier innovation, in going for green, particularly frontier. And what should be also ASAP is transfer of green technologies to emerging countries. You see, to make them, to allow them to cheaply access green technologies. So, for example, a world sovereign wealth fund, for example, or whatever, you see that would make it easier for them to access green technologies. That should be fast. But now we should understand that we cannot ask less developed countries to move at the same speed as we are towards green. That would be my answer.
Okay. And just on the institutions for this, I mean,
Yes.
many of these issues are coming up, for example, in our trade negotiations with the EU.
Yeah.
Some of
Yeah.
these issues are also coming up
Yeah.
in
You're right.
at the COP. So, in
Yeah.
a sense, what do you think is the right forum for
Yeah.
bringing innovation back? As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the UNFCCC saw innovation as a global public good. What we've
Yeah.
seen
Yeah.
since then is the privatization of innovation. Any
Yeah.
thoughts on the policy dimensions?
Yeah, and on the policy, but I don't know, there are various ideas there. I don't know if G20 is a natural place for that. I mean, Nick Stern would have a better ideas than I do, probably, and you and Nick Stern and any forum or Al Gore, we should set up sovereign wealth funds to facilitate access of less developed countries to green technologies. I think is would be very important to do, and that's what I would that's what I would advocate. Quoi. So anything that can favor this technology transfer, like we do with vaccines, like what to do with green, what Bill Gates is doing with vaccine, it could be private foundation, it can be sovereign wealth, world sovereign wealth funds. It could be a G20 fund. It can be various institutions that can help. And of course, regarding trade, we have to be very careful. On the one hand, countries that really turn into pollution heaven, we should discourage that with carbon tariffs. But we have to be very careful that that should not be a pretext for protectionism. You see what I mean? Because I don't want to have excessive protectionism against India and China in particular, because that would slow down the development of China and India, which would, in the degrowth model that I developed at the end, would slow down their transition into a less polluting economy. And that would be bad for everybody. So I think we should, as much as we want to avoid pollution heavens, we have to be to avoid the temptation of using the climate pretext to become ourselves very protectionist.
Okay. So I don't know whether I have heard, because I did not ask people to raise their hand. So
Yeah.
could Shruti tell me, am I meant to moderate it on the basis of hands being raised, or is it going to
Yeah.
be moderated by somebody in the room? I need some guidance.
Yeah.
Shruti, can you come in?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I will open to the room and people can ask questions directly from here. Suman.
Okay.
And then Suman, you
Then,
can decide whether you are answering the question or Philippe is answering the question.
okay. If
Yeah.
people could identify themselves and if you could sequence it, because I can't do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to
Sure.
leave. I need to leave in 15 minutes with all my
Me
apologies.
too. Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. Okay, and that's 5 minutes after the appointed time, and we started 5 minutes late.
Yeah.
So it'll be exactly on
Yeah,
time.
that's perfect.
Over to you, Shruti.
Yeah, hi. I have a question. I'm Utkarsh from CSEP. So India does not have explicit carbon tax, but there are some significant taxes on liquid fossil fuels. We have incentives to bring domestic manufacturing capacity. These are mostly in downstream areas right now in green tech. Very little R&D subsidies. And we are what with this manufacturing subsidies, we are trying to substitute the imports, particularly from China. So, what do you think it would lead to? It's leading to increased costs for sure, which has reduced the growth of, let's say, solar expansion. So,
Yeah.
what's your take on the long-term effect of these policies?
Okay,
So the
so
policies is to do kind of import substitution. Is that the policy that you had into of green? Is that what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah, that's my understanding. Yes.
I
right.
see, I see, I see. Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't have a clear view on that. I mean, you need. It's true that you need to encourage innovation in green and I think it would be great that we could have, that you could have mechanisms like this, so wealth funds to subsidize those industries that operate this transition in India, so that to facilitate the transition.
Okay. I
Now
would
the
think,
question
Philippe,
is, should
yeah.
you do that all domestically or partly import? That's a good question. I think it's good that you also develop, autonomous ability to innovate in those clean clean technologies. I think I am not entirely always for import substitution. There are cases where Brazil, for example, had a policy of entirely import substitution. That's not always the best, policy. But I think it's good that you develop an expertise in going green, and that we should subsidize that expertise and help you develop it. So I think that would be my answer. Suman, you may want to elaborate on this.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think an efficient process might be if I quickly reframe the question and then put it to you, unless I have an answer myself. And, I think the question really here is partly, as it were, sovereignty and partly CBAM, which is to say that we are being asked, as it were, to show our green credentials in the absence of a carbon tax. And there are lots of reasons, including distributional reasons, why India has not yet agreed to impose a carbon tax.
Yeah.
I mean, there are forms of carbon pricing.
I see.
And
I see.
so,
So my answer there is that you should not only, since there are multiple instruments, green industrial policy is another way to show that you comply. You see what I mean? So that's the advantage of having multiple instruments. The US, they use mainly green industrial policy, and I think China also mainly resorts to green industrial policy. It's important at some moment to have a carbon tax, because without any carbon tax, even with green industrial policy, you don't have much incentive, but you need always the carrot and the stick. So at some moment, you will need to have the carbon tax, because when I give you the alternative of using a tram, if I don't put any carbon tax, you may continue to use a car. You see what I mean? A thermic car. So once I have built the alternatives, it becomes important at some moment to have the carbon tax, because otherwise you keep the bad habits when you have the alternative at hand. We had the yellow vest movement in France because we raised tax even though people didn't have an alternative to a thermic car. And that's what prompted the yellow vest movement in France. So I think
well, let's just get a couple of more questions in here. Right. Shruti, over to you, and then I'll try and interpret it and get Philippe to respond. We only have 5-7 minutes now. And let's keep it to about 2 minutes per question. Shruti?
Oh, hi, Philippe. It's Catherine Wolfram from MIT. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Catherine. Welcome.
I guess I see the stark dichotomy between clean and dirty. So, say in the electricity context, clean is renewable and dirty is coal. How do I think about innovation in things that apply directly to the dirty, but like carbon capture and sequestration? I mean, like with your natural gas example, if we have a lot of natural gas, then there's even more of an incentive to invest in carbon capture and sequestration. There's not kind of the trade-off. You have technology, or you have kind of expertise in dirty, and that makes you better able to decarbonize the dirty.
Yeah, that's right. But that's why you saw there was a kind of spillover from past dirty into current clean in the thing I showed you for the car industry. So that might be part of it. You see, expertise on dirty spills over to current clean. But you're right that, you know, better capture, you have that spillover. But still, that's yeah. So, but what would be, so what I don't see is that how would that change the type of policy prescription? Does that question the fact that you need multiple instruments and then you need to act right now? That's
Philippe, I think the point
that's what I try to understand. I take your point. You're absolutely right. But but in your, when I take what you say into account, does that change the policy prescription general that I made for acting right away and using multiple instruments?
Intuition is that would put more weight on the carbon tax. That if you don't, you know, you don't need the base of clean to get clean innovation because you're doing innovation on the dirty, then the carbon tax does more work. But you've thought about this version.
Always, yeah, but there is, you know, it might put more weight, but I know too well the pitfalls of putting all your eggs in the carbon tax. In France, it was dramatic. The Champs-Élysées were in fire. I don't know if you've been, you know, in France in 2018, we set the country in fire by only having the carbon tax and giving no alternative. You see what I mean? So you need to have the alternatives. How do you make the alternatives come in? And that's why you need to solve the coordination problem. I took the example of the electric car. How do you solve this coordination problem to make sure you greenify a value chain? The carbon tax will not do the job. So you may say, I put more weight or less weight, but the carbon tax alone will not solve our problem. There's no way. You need all these innovation, and you need to push directly from those innovation. And there are multiple. They include, by the way, what I call the amelioration innovation. I think at some point we may have to resort to them. And the carbon tax alone will not. It's absolutely important to have the carbon price signal, and because without the stick you don't do anything. But believing that the carbon tax alone will solve the problem, I think is totally wrong. It won't. We will need those innovations, multiple dimensions. And if we only rely on the carbon tax, we face, you see that, we don't solve these coordination problems. We won't have the alternatives, and we face, you know, the kind of problems that we face in France.
So if I could just respond a little bit.
But I see your point. It may be just what is the optimal weight on one or the other, and the optimal timing as well. You see, when should you put the carbon tax? How, and that's the whole engineering of the timing of the carbon tax and the timing of the industrial policy. But I think on the ground, I think it's very hard to contest that you need both. A pure carbon tax is unrealistic, is politically infeasible, and I think largely suboptimal. You impose excessively high costs on the current generations. I mean.
Catherine, if I could just come in a little bit, because this is very relevant, you know, to the dilemmas facing India. So we are committed to using coal, but not unabated coal. And yet, you know, people come down on us. I think underlying this are two concerns. One is that the unabated won't be in the money, so it won't happen. And the second is that if it's preempting, as it were, renewables, it's preventing you from going down the cost curve on renewables. And so in that sense, there's a shadow price associated with it. So I thank you for raising that point. I think we have time for two more questions, and then I'd
But
like
my
to.
problem is that I have to leave in 3 minutes, so maybe one more
Okay,
question.
fine.
I'm
Right.
so sorry.
Well, in that case,
Yes.
I think let me bring it to a close at this time because I thought we had 5 minutes longer. So, Philippe, thank you for sharing this. I am very interested in what is the research agenda this
Yeah.
raises for the LSE and the IGE, the IGC and the ISI, I should say,
Yeah.
about adapting this broader framework to the circumstances of an emerging market. I mean,
Yeah.
we have our own narrative, which is about climate justice, but forget that. I mean, we, on the one hand, are capable of innovation. On the other hand, we have seen that when emerging market, i.e. China, is really successful at green innovation, they come in for, as it were, their own share of brickbats. So the political economy of, as it were, how we invest is difficult. But I think an important policy implication that, with you, with the LSE, with CPR, so what credit should countries be given for, as it were, their innovation initiatives? Because the earlier formulation was that this is a global public good. It's no longer turning out to be that. But if, to some extent, there's a frontier between the carbon tax and innovation, then that frontier should be recognized in global policy rather than all the effort being put. So with that, let me thank you and wish you all the best, and perhaps our paths will cross at some future time. My thanks to the IGC and ISI for giving me this privilege, and back to you, Shruti.
Thank you so much, and my apologies for having to leave now. And thanks so much also to Catherine for the question, and to all of you. And we should pursue the debate. I think there is a fantastic research program ahead of us, and I very much hope we pursue it together.
So Philippe, hi, it's Robin Burgess. So I just wanted to thank you and Suman. Interestingly, this morning we had a session on carbon pricing and markets, and then another session on energy transition. But I think what you were saying, Suman, is really, really important, that what's happening in China, particularly on the green industrial policy, maybe is setting a kind of frontier for not only innovation, but also the possibilities for diffusion from that frontier to help kind of break that, to have what Philippe wants, which is both a carbon tax and green industrial policy. But all that green technology may not need to originate in all countries. Obviously, India may originate in India, which would be even better. But I think that's really giving the world hope that we can get through to this transition, in large part both because the carbon taxes are spreading across the world, and green industrial policy is really being very, very successful in at least a small number of countries outside, North America and Europe. So I think that is sort of giving the world hope. So, and in particular, countries like India, which are going to both benefit from both the introduction of carbon taxation, but also from enjoying the frontier that is being pushed out by India. But anyway, thank you both for an amazing session, and I'll see you both at some point. Thanks.
Thanks, Robin. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you, and my apologies for not being there in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Philippe. Thanks, Suman.